Welcome, everybody, to the Teledyne FLIR FH-Series webinar, where we will be talking about the imminent release of our new FH-Series ID camera. I am Marty Major with the Sales Enablement team at FLIR, and we also have Kai Monsino with us today. And Kai is our Global Business Development Manager for Security, who knows all about this camera and can answer pretty much any question you can throw at him. You can see by this intro slide that the FH-Series ID camera is a multispectral fixed perimeter security camera. What you can't see are the new CNN analytics that have been embedded into this new camera that are really much more robust than some of our previous analytics. You're going to see that as we go forward. Now, keep in mind that the FH-Series is our first multispectral fixed security camera. Sure, we've had multispectral PTZs for a long time, but this is the first time we've offered multispectral capabilities in a fixed perimeter camera. As in all of our webinars using this platform, the question section is your conduit to ask questions, seek clarification, or add some of your own comments, either during this presentation or at the end when we'll have a Q&A session to make sure that we answer all questions. We're going to start the discussion with some use case scenarios in perimeter security and talk about some of the benefits of the FH-Series ID camera. Then we're going to move on to an overview, followed by some target applications. And finally, those last 3 bullet points include how the FH-Series camera can integrate with any VMS, some examples of the new analytics that are built into the FH-Series, and close out with some ordering information. Now, if you've seen our other webinars showcasing Teledyne FLIR perimeter solutions, this slide might seem familiar. We've used it a lot over the years to hammer home the multi-layer approach that is needed to effectively protect perimeters. In previous versions of this slide, the bottom right circle showed our FC-Series ID cameras, which we've used for a long time as our fence line detection layer for our perimeter protection solutions. With the FH-Series cameras, not only do we add the visible sensor for verification purposes, since the FC-Series ID camera is thermal only, we also have improved neural network-based analytics that have a lower false alarm rate and improved target detection capabilities, plus the best-in-class super high thermal sensitivity rating of 30 millikelvins. And there'll be more on that later. And you can see on the left-hand side the bullet points, multi-layered approach, that's the big thing. Automation, we want this to do it kind of on its own and only alert us when we should be caring about it. We've got these fixed cameras shooting down fence lines at all of the different angles. Radar, of course, gives us a further detection capability that we did not have, right? I mean, perimeter protection is great, and we should be protecting our fence lines, but sometimes we need to know about those threats long before they even reach our fence line to be able to prevent possible intrusion. And then reliability and low false alarm rates. That's really huge in this brand new camera because of those neural network-based analytics. Now, those neural network-based analytics, you might see the term CNN, and they stand for convolutional neural networks. And basically, they're just so much more robust than our previous analytics that we had available. And I think you'll see in some of the demonstrations as we go forward how quickly and much more robustly they actually identify and stick with those targets. So I think you're going to be pleased when you see that. So let's talk here about some of the benefits of the FH-Series ID cameras. Now, the left circle is a kind of a nod to the thermal sensor on that camera that overcomes weather and lighting issues that can sometimes obstruct detection by a visible camera. But having both technologies on one camera, we include the strength of both the thermal and the visible sensor that you can see, or at least the visible sensor that you can see in the second circle, and the combination of the two, including the extra analytics. The visible gives us that instantaneous assessment, whereas our, for instance, the FC ID cameras could do the thermal stuff, but of course it did not have a visible sensor on there to complement it. Now, the third circle is a really cool new feature that the new FH-Series ID provides. When the camera is properly calibrated, the new analytics can determine the actual geolocation of detected threats using depth and terrain modeling. Now, this can be plotted on any GIS mapping function, kind of like radar can, which of course can then also be integrated into any VMS. On the last circle shows we can schedule the use of analytics depending on the needs of the customer. For instance, you could set the analytics to only engage at certain times, like after hours, overnight, weekends, etc., and be turned off during the day when people and humans are expected to be on site. All right, you can see the key features here, and they're primarily in orange, the ones that we want to pay attention to. Up on the far right top, you can see the 4K visible imager right next to the thermal imager. You'll also note that this camera also has 7 different lensing options depending on the perimeter that's being protected, from shorter range perimeters to long range fence line, which is similar to the thermal lensing options that we have for the FC series cameras as well, with one specific difference. Note the thermal sensitivity on the right in the middle. 30 millikelvins. Now, if you've seen the other cameras that we've had out there, 35 is the lowest number that we've achieved prior to this model coming out. And if you know anything about thermal sensitivity, the lower the millikelvin number, the higher the clarity you're going to be able to see in any scene that has different objects. Right? You might, if it's not very sensitive, for instance, you may see a sort of shady shape in the background, but you can't tell what it is. The more sensitive it is, i.e., the lower millikelvin number, the more clarity you're going to be able to tell and say, oh, that's a pole, or that's whatever it is, because it gives you that clarity. That's what thermal sensitivity is all about, and it's a big thing in this camera, being down to 30 millikelvin. So I'm excited about that. Now, keep in mind, one additional thing to note about thermal sensitivity is weather conditions can really play a toll, on being able to see the clarity between objects in a scene. So the more rainy it is, the more foggy it is, the lower your MK number, the better your sensitivity is going to be in those adverse weather conditions. Now, you can also see here on the right-hand side the Nexus server, right? That allows us direct communications between other devices like PTCs, etc. It's just one way that we can integrate this camera into other applications or other devices. And it does have a single IP address, which is important, right? It's one camera license in FLIR latitude, whereas some of the other integrations that we have with other VMSs, you may actually have to have 2 licenses, one for each stream. However, this still is the same single IP address. It's IP67 rating for keeping the bad weather out. And as I mentioned already, the CNN video analytics are available, both the thermal and the visible side. And that's kind of important, right? One of them can be the one where we have assigned the analytics to. Maybe it's during the daytime. We'll give the analytics during the daytime. Remember that scheduling that I talked about? We'll give that job to the visible sensor. But at night, maybe it makes more sense to have our analytics running on the thermal sensor. And the flexibility to be able to utilize those analytics across either of the sensors is, again, one of the other things that make this camera really cool. And we have a 10-year thermal sensor warranty along with a 3-year camera warranty, just like all of our other thermal cameras that we have out there. And lastly on this slide, then, the ONVIF profiles. We've always had ONVIF Profile S, which is a streaming profile. With this new camera, we've actually added the G and T ONVIF profiles as well. So on this slide, what we're trying to show are the various strengths and weaknesses of each of our perimeter protection solution layers. You can see we've got visible cameras in the first line, thermal cameras, multispectral, right, which is where this camera falls, and then radar in addition to that. And again, we talked about layering for our perimeter protection solutions. And what you can see here is the visible cameras on the left-hand side, well, they're really good at forensic suspect identification, face recognition, object classification, right? Because they can see those things. Down below, however, they're not so good at those other things because they're not really designed to do that. And that's why we need the layers, right? One layer is never going to be a good solution on your perimeter. Adding multiple layers to your solution, of course. And you can see that by the green check marks that are here, right? Look at the overlapping of all of those green check marks. The thermal cameras, of course, are not very good at the top 2 things because they're thermal cameras. They're not designed for that. They can't see visible light. However, they extend the benefits down a little bit further than the visible cameras do, right? We have more green check marks down in the use for 24/7 perimeter intrusion detection, right? 24/7 is not so great with visible because they can't see at night. Temperature measurement because they're thermal cameras, and you can start to use them in longer range applications. As we move to the multispectral column right there, you can see, obviously, anything that's a green check mark in the visible camera and the thermal camera is going to be in the multispectral camera because this camera combines all of those benefits together into one unit. And then finally, further on the right-hand side, now before I go to this radar column, look down at the bottom couple lines. None of these solutions are very good for huge area detections, drone detections, things like that. And those are also attack vectors that we need to cover in any perimeter. So that's why radar is a great added layer. We're just about to release another brand new radar series I hope everybody knows about it already, but it is that great additional layer, both the multispectral camera with the enhanced CNN analytics and the radar you add to the solution nobody's getting in. Okay, cybersecurity, of course, it's very important. Again, if you've been at some of our previous webinars, this slide will look very similar because all of our cameras need cybersecurity to make sure that our components are not the launch pads of badness into the customer's networks. And conversely, we need to make sure that the customer's networks were to be compromised, that our stuff is protected from those, right? So cybersecurity is a huge deal. All of these things you see listed on the left-hand side, we've employed for at least a couple of years now. We keep adding more cybersecurity or cyber defense, I like to say better than cybersecurity, to our products as new technologies come forward. Blocking ports, things of that nature you can see are all listed here. One of the new things to point out, though, at the very bottom is the IP address filtering. This is not something that we've had on thermal cameras before, but now we do have that. So I think that's an important thing as well. It's just an additional defensive layer, basically, that we employ in our cybersecurity defense. Let's talk a little bit about target markets for the FH-ID camera. Oh, you can see at the bottom, right, the best summary of use cases for this new multispectral camera is shown. And the FH-ID is designed for perimeter security of critical infrastructure sites where premium performance is required. We're not talking about 7-Elevens, right? We're not talking about low-end solutions, right? This is where the performance is the measure of what the customer is going to choose as far as their perimeter protection solutions. We're talking about power utilities, data centers, the ones that you can see on the right-hand side as well. Anything large and open that has a perimeter that needs to be protected, it fits right into the wheelhouse of the FH-ID camera. In the systems integration section, we're going to show how some of these cameras can communicate with other system components. In this example, we're simply showing how multiple FH-ID cameras and multiple PTZs can be integrated together. But this can also be done one-to-one, one-to-many, or many-to-many like we're showing right here. The key in all of these scenarios is that when an FH detects something, it communicates with the PTZ or multiple PTZs to slew to the detection location, and there are a couple ways that we're able to do that. If you look on the right-hand side right here, the nexus-to-nexus communication, where we actually have the device slew to observe the closest to itself object, or the object that's in its region that it's been designed to detect. If the target moves into another zone, maybe a different PTZ can be communicated to via the Nexus server, and then that will then skew to the object. Maybe the object's moving between different zones. So it gives you something similar to kind of PTZ tracking, but without any of the hardware that's required, like the TRK-101P that we use to integrate to actually have a PTZ track that moving object. And you can see on the left-hand side, or as it goes towards the left, the Nexus server is not the only communication, right? The cameras communicate via our TSP stream and ONVIF events into the network, which can then be integrated right into the VMS. You can see latitude 9 showing right here, but we can have two different tiles, one for the thermal, one for the visible. We can also have PTZs coming in with their own, and a map, we could integrate with as well. So being able to do that and have the operator, it just makes the job a lot easier for the operator because they have more data, right? They have more different things that are communicating to them at the same time. And that's really the magic of an enterprise level system, is the ability for multiple things to all be managed on one platform. All right, now this is an example of that cool new thing that we talked about on one of those circles, our new geolocation capabilities. So what you're looking at in the top left pane is the FH-ID detecting a human target. The bottom pane represents a visible PTZ that might be tracking that human target based on the GPS data and coordinates provided by the FH-Series camera. The pane on the right represents a map pane where that same geolocation data is plotted visually, so operators can tell exactly where each target is and which direction and where they're going. Here we can see how both visible and thermal streams from the FH-Series camera look when installed in latitude 9. The visible image having a much wider field of view, right, due to the resolution differences between the visible 4K resolution and the thermal VGA resolution. All right, now here's another video of United VMS Latitude, but this is version 8, in case that's what you still have. We can see bookmarks are being created automatically whenever an event occurs in this version of Latitude, just like it does in version 9. Towards the end, you can see the human is detected. It's followed by Latitude creating a bookmark to tag that event. Okay, on the next few slides, we just wanted to show how the FHID camera appears in integrations with some of the other major VMSs that are out there. Currently, right now, we're still working on getting these all certified with all of the VMSs, right? So the compatible products list on these vendors may not currently be showing that this camera will be integrated, but we're moving forward very quickly in that, and that should change very shortly. So right here, you can look at, this is what Genetec looks like. On the next slide, you can see what it looks like in Milestone, in the admin console on the left-hand side, and also in their client version on the right. The next slide is of Visualon. This is their application, and this is how our camera looks in their application. And then finally, a little peek at what it looks like in Exact Vision. You can see these right here. The client on the bottom, the admin console up on the top. And again, these initial release, we're not going to have these integrations certified, but that is coming right down the road. Now let's show some examples of these new CNN video analytics in the FH-Series ID camera. Keep in mind that webinar platforms can sometimes introduce a bit of latency and make the clips appear a bit choppy. To see the actual clips or even a live demo of this camera, please reach out to your Teledyne FLIR salesperson. All right, you can see in this first clip, we've got a vehicle that's been identified as such, right? It's in our target area. And here comes a human about to get out of the right-hand side of that car. It's immediately classified as a human, right? Even now, the camera can't really see all of the human, but it never loses that target. Once the human leaves the target area, as you're going to see here in a second, the classification goes away, but the white box is still lit up. Why? Because the vehicle is still in that target area. One other thing you might note here, and it's about to go off here, right? Car just went out of the area. Now it's gone. Box turns black again. Check out the thermal shadow that's left right where that car was parked for a period of time, right? Sun's beating down on that big parking lot. He sits there for a period of time. The radiant energy doesn't enter on that spot that he's sitting over. He drives away, and you can see the difference. And that has a lot to do with that really high thermal sensitivity that we talked about for this camera. All right, now in this slide right here, it's pretty straightforward. This guy is going to be detected as a human quickly as soon as he enters the zone. But look at the top up there as well in that same zone. This vehicle just now entered the zone and has been identified and classified as a vehicle. Now, one thing to keep in mind about vehicles, for the analytics to work properly, they need to be able to see both sets of tires, right? It's a thing that vehicles have, just like analytics to detect a human. They need to be able to see some of those human characteristics, right? Bipedal, swinging arms, head on top, things like that. That's how the analytics have been trained with many, many, many different versions of people walking, cars driving, things like that. So, and you'll see here in the upcoming slides, sometimes the object could be occluded a little bit, but the analytics are still strong enough to be able to keep with the target, even when it can only see a portion of that target after it's been classified as whatever it's classified as. Now in this clip, we're showing an example of a TRIPWIRE detection. The thermal image is on the left, the visible image is on the right. And you might have noted that the thermal image produced a white box, right? The attention box, even before we could see the object in that thermal image. This is because the analytics are running on the visible sensor at the moment, and the wider field of view shows the human at the edge of the scene before he appears on the thermal image. You can see this visually where on the visible image, the big truck next to the fence isn't even showing in the thermal image. Again, because of the difference in resolution between 4K and VGA. Now here's another video of the same side-by-side thermal and visible images where a human will run across that field right there, and both images show the human classification. Then he starts walking. Eventually, when he gets out of there, he comes out of the area of interest, and then the box disengages because the target has exited the zone, which you just saw happen. All right, so it can detect speed as well, right? Speed is not a deterrent. Generally, it's still the analytics are able to pick up slower moving and faster moving objects and classify them as humans
or vehicles. So in this clip, we just wanted to show how occlusions, or objects that obscure our target, can be overcome by these new, more robust analytics, which continue to track the classified object even when a significant portion of the target is blocked by other things in the scene. As you can see here, he's walking between cars. There may be only 50% of him showing now, but we do not lose the human classification. He's going to go behind here in just a second, and you'll see that the analytics are robust enough to detect. Okay, he's there. Now he's out of the zone because he was fully blocked by that big truck that was right there. Now, in this last slide, we're going to show how these new neural network analytics are far better at ignoring occlusions, like we saw with the human. But here is a moving vehicle that you can see being partially blocked by that large truck on the right. And then even when the targeted vehicle is at least half occluded by the parking, once they eventually make it into the parking spot right here, the analytics are still robust enough, as I mentioned, to never lose the identified target, even when, as you'll see here, they finally make it into the 8-point turn. They finally make it into the parking spot. It's a good half of that vehicle is occluded at various times as it's driving around, and the analytics are still strong. So now let's talk a little bit about ordering information. All right, you can see on the left-hand side here are the part numbers. Now, the accessories listed here are mostly reused from the F series, except for a couple of the new ones, like the wall mount. All right, that had to be beefed up a little bit because this new camera has a bit of extra weight comparatively. And there's an illumination mount specifically for the FH series. But we can see that on the very next slide. We get a visual of those mounts themselves. If you think about it like in a visual horseshoe from the bottom left over the top, those 5 mounts exist in the F series mount family. The two new ones are the wall mount you see down in the bottom middle. That's actually a sort of dummy pick. We haven't produced it yet, but it's coming. So we just threw something in there to try to give the indication that it needs to be a little sturdier. And finally, the illumination bracket is for adding light arrays, generally from a company called Raytech, you probably have heard of. And these bolt right down to the mount arm and provide additional lighting to the FH series camera's field of view. And a note that the FH has 2 digital IOs, and one or both can be used to link to the illumination arrays. Now, also, these illuminators can be powered via 24-volt power, basically as a pass-through in the camera, using the same terminal block to make cabling and infrastructure a lot easier. All right, a little bit about our warranty policy. We've got that 3-year camera warranty, the 10-year thermal sensor warranty, just like our existing thermal products. The warranty page will be updated, and that, I think, is a wrap on the FH ID.